Okay, here's a thought. What if every single time you face death, like a really bad car crash, a terrible illness, maybe even, I don't know, a bullet with your name on it, what if you actually survived?
Oh.
Just in another reality. And maybe you, the you listening right now, are the version that's just miraculously kept dodging death over and over and over again. Welcome to the cool, weird, and possible. We are diving into an idea today that honestly, it sounds like pure sci-fi, like something straight out of a really trippy movie. But it's actually a serious, well, maybe serious is strong. It's a speculative thought experiment.
Highly speculative,
You're
yeah.
right. And it comes out of this really debated corner of quantum mechanics. Today, we're talking about quantum immortality. And it forces you to ask some pretty unsettling questions, I think, about consciousness, survival, what's even real.
It really does, and it's super important right off the bat to frame this properly. Quantum immortality, or QI, it's not like established science, not even close.
Okay, good disclaimer.
Yeah, it's a possible consequence, a speculative one, of a specific way of interpreting quantum mechanics. The physics of the very small, atoms, particles, all that weird stuff. Specifically, it stems from something called the many worlds interpretation.
Ah, many worlds, MWI. This is where things get delightfully confusing for me. How does MWI say reality works, especially compared to like the normal way people think about quantum physics?
That's the perfect place to start, because MWI basically tosses out a central idea from the, let's call it the traditional view, the Copenhagen interpretation. You know, the famous Schrodinger's cat experiment?
The cat in the box, yeah, poor thing.
Exactly. So in the Copenhagen view, you put the cat in the box with its quantum trigger, maybe a radioactive atom that might decay, might not. Before you look, the cat is in what's called the superposition. It's like both alive and dead at the same time.
Which is just bizarre.
Totally bizarre. But then the act of observing opening the box collapses that superposition. It forces reality to kind of pick a lane. The cat is either definitely alive or it's definitely dead in our one reality.
Okay, so looking makes reality make up its mind.
That's the Copenhagen picture, yeah.
Yeah.
One outcome happens, the others just vanish. Now, MWI comes along and says, nope, no collapse.
No collapse, then what happened?
When that quantum event happens, the atom decays or doesn't decay. The entire universe splits. It branches.
Whole
Whole universe. So in one branch, the atom decayed, the poison gets released, the cat's dead. Sad times in that branch. But in another branch, the atom didn't decay, the cat's perfectly fine, purring away.
And both branches are real.
Both are equally real, equally valid. They just continue on their own separate paths. There's no collapse, just branching. Every possible outcome gets its own universe.
Okay, so if I open the box in MWI, there's one universe where I see a dead cat, and a completely separate universe where another me sees a live cat. And both me's are real. Both cats are real.
That's the core idea of many worlds. And it's not just cats and boxes. Every single time a quantum event happens with multiple possible outcomes, which is happening constantly, everywhere, all the time, the universe branches.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of universes. My head's spinning already. But how does that universe splitting lead to me potentially living forever? The connection isn't jumping out at me.
Right. That's the next step. This is where the quantum suicide thought experiment comes in. It's a pretty dark idea, actually.
Quantum suicide figures doesn't sound very cheerful. Okay, tell me about it.
It's often credited to physicist Max Tegmark, among others, as a way to illustrate this quantum immortality concept within MWI. So imagine an experimenter. Let's call her Alice. She sets up a situation where her life depends directly on a random quantum event.
Okay.
The classic setup is a sort of quantum gun pointed right at her head. The trigger isn't a finger pull, it's linked to something quantum, like the spin of an electron. Maybe if the electron spin is measured as down, the gun fires. If it's measured as up, it just clicks harmlessly.
And before you measure it, the electron is both up and down, like the cat.
Exactly, it's in a superposition. So Alice, rather bravely, or perhaps foolishly,
Definitely foolishly.
puts her head in the line of fire. What happens according to many worlds?
Okay, no collapse, so the universe splits.
Right. When the measurement of the electron spin happens, the universe branches. In branch A, the spin is measured as down. The gun fires. That version of Alice, well, she's instantly gone.
Ouch, okay.
But in branch B, the spin is measured as up. The gun just clicks. And that version of Alice is completely unharmed. She survives.
So there's a dead Alice and a live Alice in different universes. Still doesn't sound like immortality for Alice, just a surviving copy.
But here's the crucial, really weird, subjective part. The part that leads to the idea of quantum immortality. Think about it from Alice's point of view, from her first-person experience.
Okay.
Which outcome will she experience? She can only experience the outcome where she's still conscious, right?
Well, yeah. You can't experience being dead.
Precisely. So the version of Alice in the Gunfire's branch ceases to have any conscious experience. Her perspective ends. But the Alice in the Gun clicks branch, she continues. She hears the click, feels relief, and keeps on experiencing reality.
So, from her perspective, she always hears the click. She never experiences the gun firing.
That's the core claim of QI. Because consciousness requires being alive, the only reality Alice can subjectively experience is the one where she survives the quantum event. The branch where she died is simply outside of her conscious awareness. It happened in its own universe, but not to her, from her continuing perspective.
Okay, hold on. That's deeply weird. So if Alice did this experiment like 100 times, normally the odds would catch up. She'd be gone super fast. But in MWI, her experience would be click, 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 click. 100 times in a row. She'd feel impossibly lucky.
Exactly. From her subjective viewpoint, she would only ever perceive the timeline where the gun clicked. She'd keep experiencing the survival branch. The probability of a subjective continued existence seems to remain 100% at each step, even while countless other branches contain versions of her that died. To her, it would look like she's charmed or has insane survival instincts. That's the subjective immortality.
So it's not about being bulletproof or indestructible.
No, not at all.
It's about the guarantee, from your own point of view, that you'll always find yourself on the timeline where you didn't just die.
That's the essence of it. Your subjective experience always continues along a surviving branch.
Okay. Wow, that is unsettling. But hang on, does this apply to just any life-threatening situation? Like, if I decide to just, play chicken with a bus, will I always subjectively experience the universe where the bus misses?
Ah, that's a really important distinction. The classic quantum suicide thought experiment relies on the life or death outcome being triggered by a fundamentally quantum event, like the electron spin. A bus hitting you is generally considered a macroscopic classical event, not directly tied to a single quantum coin flip in the same way.
So it has to be quantum randomness deciding my fate.
For this specific mechanism, yes.
Yeah.
Now, things get fuzzier if you bring in ideas like, say, Roger Penrose's speculations about quantum processes in the brain being linked to consciousness itself.
Yeah.
If consciousness or decisions had a quantum component, then maybe. But that's another big speculative leap.
So maybe some really specific situations, but probably not just deciding to ignore traffic laws.
Probably not. And most physicists would say linking all our choices or all near-death experiences one-to-one with quantum branching and guaranteed subjective survival is, let's just say, a terrible assumption. It stretches the interpretation pretty thin.
And I'm guessing the whole many worlds idea itself, let alone quantum immortality, isn't exactly universally loved in the physics world. It sounds pretty wild.
Oh, absolutely not universally loved. MWI has its serious proponents, people who think it's the most elegant solution to certain quantum puzzles, but many physicists are very skeptical.
Why? What are the big objections?
Well, a major one is testability. Critics argue that MWI doesn't actually make any experimental predictions that are different from, say, the Copenhagen interpretation. If you can't test it, is it really science?
Right, the falsifiability thing.
Exactly. Then there are the, let's call them ontological objections. Where do all these universes come from? Where does the energy to create infinite copies of the universe spring from? It seems to violate principles like Occam's razor, don't multiply entities beyond necessity. Critics often say it feels more like philosophy or even science fiction than hard science.
I think I saw someone describe QI specifically as, like, not even a theory, but just a thought experiment with about as much evidence as, well, supernatural beliefs.
That's a sentiment you definitely hear, because its justification relies entirely on accepting MWI first, and MWI itself is built on interpreting existing quantum math, not on unique new evidence. Proponents argue MWI is simpler because it removes the need for the mysterious collapse, but critics say trading collapse for infinite unobservable universes isn't simpler at all.
What about that idea, though? If there are infinite universes, doesn't that mean anything can happen? So surely one where I survive must exist.
That's a common misunderstanding of infinity. It's like saying there are infinite numbers between 1 and 2, 1.1, 1.01, 1.001, infinitely many. But you'll never find the number 3 in there.
Okay. Infinite doesn't mean limitless.
Right. The possibilities within MWI are still constrained by the laws of physics and the specific quantum event causing the split. Infinite universes resulting from this coin flip don't mean there's a universe where the coin turned into a dragon. Only the physically possible outcomes branch off.
Got it. So, even within MWI, are there specific criticisms of the quantum immortality idea itself, beyond just doubting MWI?
Yes, definitely. One big one involves something called measure or probability amplitude. In MWI, branches aren't just created equal, they have sort of weight or probability associated with them.
Hmm.
In a quantum suicide setup, the measure associated with the branches where the observer dies, well, that consciousness isn't there anymore.
So, the total amount of my consciousness spread across all universes goes down?
That's one way to look at the math. The total measure of you existing in the multiverse decreases with each fatal outcome in a branch. Some argue this decrease in measure is functionally the same as the probability of death in the Copenhagen view. It undermines the simple idea that you just always subjectively continue, because the amount of you overall is demonstrably shrinking.
Hmm. And then there's the whole "is it really me" question, right? If I split, is the survivor actually the same person?
That throws us deep into philosophy of identity. If a perfect copy of you continues in another universe after you die in this one, does that count as your survival? The copy has your memories, your personality. It feels like you, but is it?
It feels like cheating death, maybe, like sending a clone forward.
Some philosophers argue exactly that the feeling of continuity is just an illusion. You didn't survive, a nearly identical copy did. The original you in that other branch is just gone. Where personal identity lies across branching universes is a huge, maybe unanswerable question.
And, okay, stepping back from philosophy. If this QI thing were actually happening, wouldn't we see it? Where are all the super old people?
Exactly. That's probably the most straightforward empirical argument against it. If consciousness always subjectively avoids death, why aren't there people walking around who are 200, 500, 1,000 years old?
Yeah, where's the immortal Socrates who just kept dodging the hemlock in some branch? Or people who survived every plague, every war?
You'd expect reality to look very different. You'd expect to see individuals who have beaten impossible odds over centuries. The fact that human lifespans follow predictable statistical patterns, that accidents and diseases are fatal within those patterns, that strongly suggests we don't just keep sliding into the survival branch every time. Where did all the extra consciousness go?
Okay, so scientifically it seems unlikely, to put it mildly. But the idea itself, it has some seriously creepy implications, doesn't it? Especially for, like, morality.
Oh, yeah. That's where it gets ethically very murky. If you truly believed in MWI and that every possible choice you make happens in some branch.
Then does it matter what I choose? If somewhere another me is doing the opposite, maybe doing something awful.
Precisely. One source puts it starkly. No decision you take ever changes the slightest thing about the multiverse as a whole.
Right.
You always take every possible decision anyway. If you really internalize that, it could lead to a kind of dangerous nihilism. Why bother being good? Why avoid causing harm? If all outcomes happen anyway, what's the point? It echoes that sci-fi story all the myriad ways.
That's deeply unsettling. But surely my choices still matter for my reality, the one I'm actually experiencing.
That's the crucial counter-argument, and I think the necessary one. Yes, other branches might exist, but your choices shape this branch, the reality you subjectively perceive. Your actions define who you are in this universe and impact the world this version of you inhabits. So from your first-person view, your choices absolutely still matter.
Okay, that's slightly less terrifying. But speaking of terrifying, there's the terrifying corollary to quantum immortality. Surviving doesn't mean surviving well, does it?
No. And this is maybe the darkest twist. If you are guaranteed subjective survival, you survive the immediate lethal event. But that doesn't mean you survive it unharmed, or that subsequent events are pleasant.
So I survived the quantum gun click, but maybe in that universe I trip walking away and suffer a terrible injury. Or I survived the car crash, but I'm permanently disabled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might find yourself consistently surviving immediate death, only to accumulate injuries, losses, traumas. You could end up in increasingly improbable, potentially horrific states of existence, always escaping death, but maybe wishing you hadn't. Constantly finding yourself in the branch where you live, but maybe horribly maimed, alone, or psychologically broken.
Ugh. Instead of just gently aging forever, which maybe sounds okay, the comforting corollary, you could be racking up damage in weirder and weirder surviving timelines. Alive, but in a living hell.
That's the grim possibility, yes. You're selecting for survival, not for quality of life. And the universes where you survive against incredible odds might be very strange places indeed.
Which could lead to some truly messed up thinking. Like this idea of quantum murder.
Yeah, that's a hypothetical ethical nightmare scenario discussed. The fear is someone might misunderstand or misuse these ideas. If you genuinely believe killing someone here just shunts their consciousness to another, maybe better, timeline, where they survive something else.
It could lower the barrier to violence, make it seem less final, less consequential in this reality.
That's the concern, that it could, in theory, foster a really dangerous, almost cult-like mindset, divorced from the actual implications and probabilities, treating multiverse theory like a justification for terrible actions.
Which is a huge, probably unwarranted leap, but it shows how these abstract ideas can echo in weird ways. And speaking of weird echoes, I saw this almost conspiracy-adjacent theory mentioned.
Ah, let me guess. The idea that maybe current events feel so bizarre because we're in a junk timeline?
Yes, that one. The idea that maybe we collectively survived so many potential apocalypses, nuclear war averted here, asteroid missed there, plague overcome somewhere else, that the version of humanity still here is the one that scraped through the most improbable, maybe damaged branches.
It's a darkly funny, kind of oblique thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
That the reason things feel off or chaotic is because we're experiencing the reality that survived against the odds, but maybe wasn't the best possible outcome. Like we used up the good timelines.
Yeah.
Some people apparently joked about this around, say, 2016, that the political weirdness felt like evidence we'd slipped into a less probable, less stable branch.
So the world feels weird because this is the weird timeline that managed not to end. That's both hilarious and incredibly depressing.
Wow. It's pure speculation, obviously. More of a pop culture meme or philosophical riff on MWI than anything scientific. But it definitely captures the unsettling feeling you can get when you think about branching realities and subjective survival on a grand scale.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this mindbender up. Quantum immortality. Definitely not proven science. It's a thought experiment.
A consequence of the many worlds interpretation, which itself is just one interpretation and a controversial one, of quantum mechanics.
And it's explored through things like the quantum suicide idea, showing the bizarre implications for your subjective point of view if MWI is true.
But it faces major hurdles, lack of testability for MWI, the measure problem, questions about personal identity, and the big one. Why don't we see ancient people walking around?
Right. Still, even if it's just speculation, it really makes you think, doesn't it? About consciousness, identity, reality, choice. All the big questions.
Absolutely. It pushes right up against the limits of how we understand ourselves and the universe. That tension between subjective experience and the potential objective structure of reality, or multiverse,
Yeah.
is fascinating.
So maybe the next time you have a close call, you can ask yourself, what does it really mean that you are experiencing this reality right now? Just random chance or something stranger happening across endless potential universes. Thanks for going down that weird, fascinating rabbit hole with us. If you enjoy exploring the cool, the weird, and the possible like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss our future deep dives.